The photograph that shattered Arjun Malhotra's world was sent to him by his sister-in-law during a routine family vacation to Goa, showing two figures walking hand in hand along Candolim Beach in what appeared to be intimate celebration of their romantic getaway, completely unaware that their image was being captured by someone who would recognize the supposedly deceased woman as Priya Malhotra, whose funeral Arjun had attended 6 years earlier after identifying her mangled body following a devastating highway collision. Arjun had spent over 2,000 days grieving the woman he believed had died instantly when her Honda Accord collided with a tractor trailer on Interstate 95 during what was supposed to be a routine drive to visit her sister in Boston, leaving behind only twisted metal, scattered personal belongings, and a traumatized husband who blamed himself for not insisting on driving her to the airport instead. The man walking beside Priya in the photograph was unmistakably Ravi Shah, Arjun's college roommate and closest friend for over 20 years, the same person who had delivered the eulogy at Priya's memorial service and had spent countless hours consoling the widowed husband while secretly planning a new life with the woman whose death had been an elaborate deception designed to facilitate their escape from matrimonial obligations. The investigation that would follow this shocking discovery would reveal a conspiracy involving forged death certificates, falsified accident reports, and insurance fraud totaling over $1 million, orchestrated by two people who had systematically destroyed the trust and emotional stability of someone who had loved them completely while believing their fabricated tragedy represented the worst possible loss he could experience. The psychological impact of learning that his wife's death had been staged while his best friend participated in consoling him created a crisis of reality that forced Arjun to question every memory of their relationship while confronting the possibility that everything he had believed about love, loyalty, and friendship had been built on lies that extended back years before the supposed accident. The financial crimes that supported Priya's fake death extended beyond simple insurance fraud to include identity theft, tax evasion, and money laundering that had enabled her to establish a new life under an assumed name, while Ravi provided both emotional and financial support through his restaurant business that served as a front for their illegal activities. The cultural implications of their deception were particularly devastating within their tight-knit Indian American community, where arranged marriages and lifelong friendships represented sacred bonds that transcended individual desires for personal happiness or financial gain, making their betrayal a violation of fundamental values that had defined their shared identity for generations. The legal investigation that Detective Laura Green would initiate uncovered evidence of premeditation that extended back months before the staged accident, with documentation showing that Priya had been systematically transferring assets, researching identity change procedures, and coordinating with Ravi to establish the financial and logistical framework necessary for her disappearance and rebirth. The emotional manipulation that both conspirators had employed against Arjun included calculated displays of grief and support that reinforced his trauma while preventing him from asking questions that might have exposed inconsistencies in their fabricated narrative about the accident and its aftermath that had forever changed his understanding of reality and trust. The insurance investigator Daniel Hayes had harbored suspicions about irregularities in Priya's case for years, though his concerns had been dismissed by supervisors who saw no reason to question a straightforward vehicular fatality that appeared to have generated all appropriate documentation and witness testimony supporting the claim for death benefits. The community impact of the revelation extended far beyond personal betrayal to include questions about how such elaborate deception could occur within social networks that prided themselves on mutual support and cultural integrity, forcing difficult conversations about the limits of trust and the warning signs that might prevent similar victimization in the future. The relationship between Arjun and Priya Malhotra had appeared to represent an ideal marriage within their New Jersey Indian American community, with both partners maintaining successful careers while preserving traditional values and family obligations that their parents had instilled during childhoods that emphasized duty, respect, and lifelong commitment to matrimonial bonds that transcended individual desires for personal fulfillment. The marriage that had begun 15 years earlier, through a combination of family introduction and mutual attraction, seemed to embody the successful integration of cultural heritage with American opportunities, as both spouses pursued professional advancement while maintaining strong connections to extended family networks and community organizations that celebrated their shared identity and values. The financial stability that Arjun provided through his successful IT consulting practice enabled Priya to pursue her accounting career without the economic pressure that affected many immigrant families, creating what appeared to be an ideal partnership where both individuals could contribute professionally while building the kind of prosperous household that their parents had dreamed of achieving in America. The social recognition that their marriage received within the community included invitations to prominent cultural events and leadership roles in organizations that served the Indian American population, with their apparent happiness and mutual respect serving as a model for younger couples who were navigating the complex balance between traditional expectations and modern relationships. The personal dynamics between Arjun and Priya were characterized by his trusting nature and her increasingly restless dissatisfaction with the predictable routine of their suburban lifestyle, though her discontent was expressed through subtle criticisms and emotional distance rather than direct communication about her desire for fundamental changes in their relationship. The friendship between Arjun and Ravi Shah had been forged during their college years at Rutgers University and had endured through career changes, marriages, and the various challenges of adult life, with both men maintaining close contact through regular social gatherings and mutual support during difficult periods that tested their individual resilience and shared values. The business success that Ravi achieved through his restaurant ventures provided him with financial resources and social status that complemented Arjun's professional reputation, creating a dynamic where the two friends could support each other's ambitions while also maintaining the kind of lifelong bond that their families valued as evidence of strong character and loyalty. The early signs of Priya's dissatisfaction with her marriage were subtle and easily dismissed as temporary stress related to career pressures or family obligations, though careful observation might have revealed a pattern of emotional withdrawal and criticism that suggested deeper problems with her commitment to the relationship and her satisfaction with the life they had built together. The clandestine relationship between Priya and Ravi began approximately 2 years before her staged death, developing from casual friendship during social gatherings to intimate emotional connection that provided her with the excitement and validation that she felt was missing from her marriage, to the dutiful but unexciting husband who took their relationship for granted. The planning phase of their deception required careful coordination to ensure that Priya's disappearance would appear accidental, while providing Ravi with plausible reasons for maintaining close contact with Arjun during the grieving process, allowing him to monitor the investigation while also providing emotional manipulation that reinforced the widower's trauma and dependence. The psychological preparation that both conspirators underwent involved research into grief responses and investigative procedures that would help them maintain their deception while avoiding behaviors that might generate suspicion from family members, community associates, or law enforcement officials who might question inconsistencies in their narrative. The financial arrangements that supported their conspiracy included the establishment of offshore accounts and investment vehicles that would receive insurance proceeds, while also providing Priya with access to funds that could support her new identity without creating traceable connections to her previous life or her relationship with Ravi. The staged accident that supposedly claimed Priya's life was meticulously planned to occur on a stretch of Interstate 95 known for dangerous conditions and frequent fatal collisions, with the conspirators choosing a location where witness testimony would be limited and physical evidence could be manipulated to support their fabricated narrative about the circumstances of the crash. The preparation for the deception included extensive research into accident reconstruction techniques, insurance investigation procedures, and the legal requirements for declaring someone deceased based on physical evidence, with both Priya and Ravi studying how similar cases had been handled to ensure their staging would withstand official scrutiny. The actual staging of the accident required coordination with criminal associates who specialized in automotive fraud and identity manipulation, providing services that included vehicle preparation, evidence placement, and the creation of false documentation that would support their narrative while avoiding detection by law enforcement and insurance investigators. The body that was identified as Priya's remains was actually that of an unidentified homeless woman whose death had been concealed and whose physical characteristics were sufficiently similar to support the deception, with dental records and DNA evidence either destroyed or falsified through corruption of officials who were paid to manipulate the identification process. The immediate aftermath of the supposed accident involved carefully choreographed responses from both Ravi and other associates who could provide witness testimony supporting the narrative of a tragic vehicular fatality, with emergency responders being presented with a crime scene that appeared consistent with a high-speed collision involving driver error and mechanical failure. The grief that Arjun experienced upon learning of his wife's death was genuine and devastating, creating psychological trauma that prevented him from asking critical questions about inconsistencies in the official narrative, while also making him emotionally dependent on support from friends and family members who were manipulating his vulnerability for their own purposes. The funeral arrangements that followed the supposed identification of Priya's remains were designed to reinforce the reality of her death, while also limiting opportunities for close examination of physical evidence that might have exposed the deception, with closed casket services that emphasized spiritual celebration rather than physical mourning. The community response to Priya's death included an outpouring of support for Arjun that reinforced his social isolation, while also providing Ravi with opportunities to position himself as the primary source of comfort and practical assistance during the widower's recovery process, creating dependency that would last for years. The insurance investigation that initially followed the accident was routine and superficial, with adjusters finding no obvious signs of fraud in what appeared to be a straightforward case of accidental death involving a respected community member with no apparent motive for staging her disappearance or committing insurance fraud. The psychological manipulation that Ravi employed during Arjun's grieving process included carefully calibrated displays of friendship and support that reinforced the widower's emotional dependence, while also gathering information about any suspicions or concerns that might threaten the conspiracy's success and longevity. The financial benefits that the conspirators began receiving within months of the staged accident included insurance payouts that were transferred through complex networks of offshore accounts and investment vehicles, providing both Priya and Ravi with access to substantial funds, while maintaining plausible distance from the original fraud. The new identity that Priya adopted following her staged death was carefully constructed through criminal networks that specialized in providing false documentation for individuals seeking to disappear, with her transformation including changes to physical appearance, personal history, and professional credentials that would support her new life. The years following Priya's supposed death were marked by Arjun's gradual adaptation to widowhood, though his emotional recovery was complicated by persistent feelings of guilt and depression that were reinforced by Ravi's continued presence as a supportive friend who encouraged rumination and self-blame rather than healthy processing of grief and trauma. The social isolation that characterized Arjun's post-loss lifestyle was carefully encouraged by Ravi, who positioned himself as the primary source of companionship while subtly discouraging the widower from developing new relationships or social connections that might provide alternative perspectives on his situation and emotional state. The financial management of Arjun's affairs was gradually influenced by Ravi's advice and assistance, creating opportunities for the conspirator to monitor his friend's resources, while also ensuring that any suspicious activities or unusual expenses would be noticed and reported back to Priya through their secret communication channels. The anniversary observances that marked Priya's death became annual rituals that reinforced Arjun's attachment to his grief, while providing Ravi with opportunities to gauge his friend's emotional state and assess whether any new information or suspicions had emerged that might threaten their conspiracy's continued success. The professional life that Priya had established under her new identity included accounting work for small businesses that paid in cash and avoided creating extensive documentation that might be discovered through background checks or financial investigations, allowing her to maintain professional skills while minimizing exposure. The romantic relationship between Priya and Ravi flourished in secret, with their connection deepened by the shared experience of maintaining an elaborate deception while also enjoying the financial benefits of their insurance fraud and the psychological satisfaction of having successfully manipulated someone they both viewed as naive and predictable. The community involvement that Arjun maintained during his widowerhood was limited but significant enough to preserve his social standing, though his interactions with other community members were colored by his reputation as a devoted husband who had never recovered from his wife's tragic death and continued to honor her memory through charitable activities. The surveillance activities that both conspirators conducted to monitor Arjun's behavior included regular social contact, digital monitoring of his communications, and coordination with mutual friends who could report on his activities and emotional state without realizing they were providing intelligence to the people who had orchestrated his trauma. The psychological toll that maintaining the deception took on both Priya and Ravi was manageable as long as their secret relationship continued to provide emotional and financial satisfaction, though occasional concerns about discovery created stress that required careful management to avoid behavioral changes that might generate suspicion. The vacation planning that would ultimately expose their conspiracy was routine and casual, with neither conspirator recognizing the risk that their public appearance together in a popular tourist destination might be witnessed and documented by someone who could identify them and understand the implications of their relationship. The photographic evidence that would eventually destroy their conspiracy was captured accidentally by Arjun's sister-in-law during a family vacation, with the image showing clear facial recognition of both Priya and Ravi, in circumstances that were impossible to explain through any legitimate scenario involving widow grief, support, or coincidental encounters. The initial shock that Arjun experienced upon receiving the photograph was so complete that he initially dismissed it as impossible coincidence or mistaken identity, though careful examination of the image provided undeniable confirmation that his supposedly deceased wife was not only alive but romantically involved with his closest friend. The confrontation that Arjun initiated with his sister-in-law about the photograph required careful verification of the details surrounding its capture, including the exact location, date, and circumstances that had enabled her to take such a clear image of two people who should not have been together if one of them had died 6 years earlier in a supposed accident. The internal crisis that Arjun experienced following confirmation of the photograph's authenticity created psychological trauma that exceeded even his original grief, as the realization that his wife's death had been staged forced him to question every aspect of his reality while processing the additional betrayal by his closest friend who had manipulated his suffering for years. The decision to contact law enforcement was difficult for Arjun, whose cultural background and personal temperament emphasized avoiding public scandal and resolving conflicts through private mediation, though the magnitude of the deception and its legal implications made official investigation unavoidable, despite his preference for discreet handling. Detective Laura Green's initial response to Arjun's report was skeptical, as his claims about a supposedly deceased wife being photographed with his best friend seemed more consistent with psychological breakdown than criminal conspiracy, though her professional experience with fraud cases prompted her to investigate rather than dismiss his allegations outright. The preliminary investigation that Detective Green conducted revealed immediate inconsistencies in the official documentation of Priya's death, including irregularities in the accident report, questions about the identity verification process, and unusual patterns in the insurance claim processing that suggested possible fraud rather than legitimate death benefits. The insurance investigator, Daniel Hayes, was contacted by police during the early stages of the investigation, providing access to case files that had been dormant for years but contained details that supported suspicions about the accident's authenticity and the legitimacy of the subsequent financial payouts to supposed beneficiaries. The forensic re-examination of evidence from the staged accident revealed significant problems with the original investigation, including inadequate documentation of physical evidence, rushed identification procedures, and witness testimony that appeared to have been coordinated rather than independently provided by genuine observers of the supposed crash. The financial investigation that accompanied the criminal inquiry uncovered complex networks of offshore accounts and money laundering operations that had been used to process and distribute insurance proceeds, revealing sophisticated knowledge of financial crimes that exceeded what would be expected from individuals without previous experience in fraud. The surveillance operation that law enforcement established to monitor both Priya and Ravi's activities confirmed their ongoing relationship, while also revealing the extent of their deception, including their use of false identities, coordination of activities to avoid detection, and continued monitoring of Arjun's emotional state and financial situation. The arrest warrants that were issued for both conspirators were coordinated to prevent them from alerting each other about law enforcement interest in their activities. Though Ravi's arrest at his restaurant was complicated by his attempts to destroy evidence and contact Priya through encrypted communication channels that had been established to maintain their secret relationship, the interrogation process that followed their arrests revealed conflicting accounts of responsibility for the conspiracy, with both defendants attempting to minimize their culpability while implicating their co-conspirator as the primary architect of the fraud scheme that had victimized Arjun and defrauded insurance companies. The community reaction to news of the arrests was shock and disbelief, as both individuals had maintained respected positions within their social network while successfully concealing their criminal activities and manipulative behavior for years without generating suspicion from friends or family members who had trusted them completely. The criminal trial that followed the arrests of Priya and Ravi attracted significant media attention within the Indian American community, highlighting issues of trust, cultural values, and the psychological impact of elaborate deception on victims who had believed in the fundamental honesty of their closest relationships and community bonds. The prosecution's case was built around the systematic nature of the conspiracy and the extensive documentation that proved premeditation, including financial records, communication intercepts, and forensic evidence that contradicted the official narrative of Priya's death while establishing the defendant's guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The testimony that Arjun provided as the primary victim was emotionally devastating but legally essential for establishing the human cost of the conspiracy, while also demonstrating the psychological manipulation that had been employed to prevent him from discovering the truth about his wife's staged death and his friend's betrayal. The expert testimony about insurance fraud and identity manipulation provided context for understanding the sophistication of the conspiracy, while also explaining how such elaborate deceptions could be maintained for years without detection by law enforcement agencies or insurance investigators who lacked specialized training in complex fraud schemes. The defense strategies employed by both defendants attempted to minimize their culpability through claims of emotional distress and mutual manipulation, with each attorney arguing that their client had been coerced or influenced by the co-conspirator, rather than being an equal partner in planning and executing the criminal enterprise. The victim impact statements that were presented during the sentencing phase included emotional testimony from Arjun about the comprehensive damage caused by their deception, including not only the obvious psychological trauma, but also the social isolation and financial consequences of living for years under the shadow of fabricated grief. The community testimony revealed conflicting perspectives about the defendant's character and the cultural factors that might have contributed to their willingness to engage in such elaborate deception, with some witnesses expressing sympathy, while others condemned behavior that violated fundamental values about honesty and loyalty. The sentencing decisions reflected the severity of the crimes and their impact on multiple victims, including not only Arjun, but also insurance companies and community members whose trust had been violated by individuals who had exploited their respected positions for criminal purposes and personal financial gain. Priya received 15 years in federal prison, along with substantial restitution requirements, while Ravi received 12 years due to his cooperation with authorities and his slightly lesser role in planning the initial stages of the conspiracy, though both sentences included probation periods and financial penalties that would continue for years. The civil litigation that followed the criminal proceedings enabled Arjun to pursue additional compensation, while also establishing legal precedents for holding conspirators accountable for the comprehensive psychological and financial damage caused by elaborate fraud schemes that exploited personal relationships and community trust. The insurance recovery process involved complex negotiations to reclaim fraudulently obtained benefits, while also addressing the company's liability for failing to detect obvious irregularities in the original investigation that might have prevented years of continued criminal activity and victimization. The media coverage of the case brought sustained attention to the phenomenon of staged deaths and elaborate fraud schemes, highlighting the warning signs that might have prevented the conspiracy, while also educating the public about resources available to victims of similar manipulation and deception. The psychological recovery process for Arjun required extensive therapy to address not only the original trauma of believing his wife had died, but also the additional damage caused by learning that her death had been staged while his closest friend had manipulated his grief for years while maintaining the pretense of supportive friendship. The community healing process within their Indian American social network involved difficult conversations about trust, cultural values, and the warning signs that might have prevented such elaborate deception from occurring within a community that prided itself on strong family bonds and mutual support among members. The financial recovery efforts extended over several years as investigators worked to trace assets that had been hidden through complex offshore arrangements, with partial success in recovering some funds, while also establishing important legal mechanisms for pursuing criminals who had fled or concealed resources through international financial networks. The victim advocacy movement that grew from Arjun's experience included specialized organizations dedicated to supporting individuals who had been victimized by people they trusted, while also lobbying for legislative changes that would enhance protection for potential victims and improve law enforcement capabilities for investigating complex fraud schemes. The educational initiatives that were developed to raise awareness about elaborate fraud and manipulation reached thousands of individuals through community programs, online resources, and media coverage that provided practical information about recognizing warning signs, while also reducing stigma associated with victimization by trusted individuals. The policy changes that resulted from advocacy efforts included enhanced verification procedures for death certificates and insurance claims, improved coordination between agencies investigating missing persons and financial crimes, and strengthened penalties for conspiracy and fraud that exploited personal relationships and community trust. The international cooperation that had been developed for investigating the financial aspects of the conspiracy continued through ongoing efforts to monitor and disrupt criminal networks that specialized in identity fraud and money laundering, while also sharing intelligence about emerging techniques and operational methods. The psychological research that continued to emerge from the case contributed to enhanced understanding of the long-term impact of betrayal by trusted individuals, while also advancing knowledge about effective therapeutic interventions and the factors that promoted resilience and recovery after experiencing systematic manipulation and deception. The community outreach programs that were implemented reached new populations through education about fraud prevention and the importance of maintaining appropriate skepticism even within trusted relationships, while also providing resources for individuals who might be experiencing manipulation or coercion from people they believed were supportive. The ongoing support services that were established for victims of elaborate fraud provided specialized assistance for individuals dealing with complex trauma, while also offering practical guidance for financial recovery and legal proceedings that could extend for years after the initial discovery of criminal deception. The memorial activities that had previously commemorated Priya's supposed death were transformed into educational programs about fraud prevention and victim support, allowing Arjun to channel his experience into meaningful advocacy, while also processing his complex emotions about the relationship that had been built on systematic lies. The social reintegration that Arjun experienced was gradual and carefully managed, with therapeutic support helping him rebuild his capacity for trust, while also maintaining appropriate caution about new relationships that might exploit his vulnerability or his public reputation as someone who had survived extraordinary deception and manipulation. The establishment of support networks for victims of elaborate fraud and deception grew from recognition that Arjun's experience was not unique, with other individuals having faced similar situations involving trusted family members or friends who had staged deaths, created false identities, or maintained other systematic deceptions for financial or personal gain. The research initiatives that were funded through victim advocacy organizations contributed to enhanced understanding of the psychological profiles and operational methods used by individuals who staged elaborate deceptions, while also advancing knowledge about effective prevention strategies and support services for families dealing with the complex emotions associated with betrayal by trusted individuals. The legislative advocacy that emerged from the case included efforts to strengthen penalties for staged deaths and elaborate fraud schemes, improve coordination between law enforcement agencies investigating such crimes, and enhanced support services for victims who needed assistance navigating complex legal and financial recovery processes that could extend for years. The educational programs that were developed to raise awareness about fraud and manipulation included information about warning signs that might indicate someone was planning elaborate deception, legal resources available to families dealing with suspected fraud, and guidance for recognizing and responding to manipulation by trusted individuals. The international cooperation initiatives that were supported by victim advocates included enhanced information sharing between law enforcement agencies, improved protocols for investigating fraud cases that might involve staged deaths or false identities, and strengthened diplomatic cooperation for pursuing criminals who had fled to foreign countries after committing fraud. The psychological treatment protocols that were developed for victims of betrayal by trusted individuals addressed the unique trauma associated with discovering that intimate relationships had been based on systematic deception, while also providing specialized approaches for rebuilding trust and emotional security after experiencing fundamental betrayal. The technology initiatives that were prompted by the case included development of better systems for verifying identity and detecting fraud, enhanced coordination between databases that might help identify patterns of deceptive behavior, and improved communication networks that could facilitate information sharing between potential victims and support services. The victim support services that were enhanced in response to the case provided specialized assistance for individuals dealing with complex fraud, while also offering practical guidance for legal and financial recovery processes that were often complicated by international jurisdictional issues and sophisticated criminal techniques. The ongoing monitoring of fraud patterns revealed that elaborate deception schemes were part of larger criminal enterprises that included identity theft operations, money laundering services, and international networks that enabled individuals to disappear from their previous lives while establishing new identities in foreign countries. The policy development that resulted from the case included enhanced verification procedures for death certificates and insurance claims, improved coordination between agencies investigating fraud and missing persons cases, and strengthened international agreements for pursuing criminals who had exploited jurisdictional boundaries to avoid accountability. The academic research that was inspired by the case contributed to enhanced understanding of the social and psychological factors that motivated elaborate deception, while also advancing knowledge about effective prevention strategies and the long-term impact of such crimes on families and communities that had been systematically deceived. The community education programs that were implemented continued to reach new audiences through various media and outreach efforts, providing practical information about fraud prevention, while also promoting awareness about the resources available to individuals who might be experiencing manipulation or coercion from people they trusted. The 10-year anniversary of discovering Priya's deception marked a significant milestone in Arjun's journey from victim to advocate, as he reflected on the personal transformation that had occurred through his pursuit of justice, while also recognizing the broader impact that his case had achieved in protecting other vulnerable individuals from similar betrayal and exploitation. The ongoing impact of the case continued to influence fraud prevention efforts and victim support services, with specialized programs that had been developed in response to his experience, continuing to provide assistance to individuals dealing with betrayal by trusted family members or friends who had exploited personal relationships for criminal purposes. The international recognition that the case received contributed to enhanced cooperation between law enforcement agencies investigating complex fraud schemes, with the legal precedents established through Priya and Ravi's prosecution continuing to influence how similar cases were investigated and prosecuted in various jurisdictions. The educational initiatives that had grown out of his advocacy work continued to reach new populations through community programs, online resources, and media coverage that provided practical information about fraud prevention, while also reducing stigma associated with victimization by people who had been trusted completely. The policy changes that his advocacy had helped achieve continued to influence law enforcement procedures and victim protection measures, while also establishing legal frameworks for investigating and prosecuting complex fraud schemes that exploited personal relationships and community trust for criminal purposes. The psychological research that had emerged from his case continued to advance understanding of the long-term impact of betrayal by trusted individuals, while also contributing to enhanced knowledge about effective therapeutic interventions and the factors that promoted resilience and recovery after experiencing systematic deception. The victim support services that had been enhanced through his advocacy continued to provide specialized assistance for individuals dealing with complex fraud, while also offering resources for families who needed help navigating legal and financial recovery processes that could extend for years after discovering criminal deception. The community outreach programs that had been established continued to provide education about fraud prevention and warning signs of potential deception, while also promoting awareness about the resources available to individuals who might be experiencing manipulation or exploitation by people they trusted. The ongoing monitoring of criminal networks revealed that while specific individuals like Priya and Ravi had been successfully prosecuted, similar fraud schemes continued to evolve and adapt their techniques to exploit new technologies and social platforms, while also incorporating traditional methods that remain difficult for law enforcement to detect. The international cooperation that had been developed for investigating complex fraud cases continued to facilitate beneficial collaboration between agencies, while also supporting diplomatic relationships that enhanced information sharing and coordinated responses to criminal enterprises that operated across national boundaries. The legislative achievements that had resulted from sustained advocacy work continued to influence policy development, while also providing frameworks for international cooperation that enhanced protection for potential victims, while improving law enforcement capabilities for investigating and prosecuting sophisticated fraud schemes. The personal relationships that Arjun had eventually developed were built on foundations of honesty and transparency that reflected lessons learned from his traumatic experience, with careful attention to warning signs and communication patterns that might indicate deception or manipulation by individuals seeking to exploit his vulnerability or reputation. 15 years after Arjun Malhotra believed his wife had died tragically in a highway accident, only to discover that her death had been an elaborate deception orchestrated with his closest friend to defraud insurance companies while psychologically manipulating him for years, his story continues to serve as both a cautionary tale about the sophistication of modern fraud schemes and an inspiring example of resilience and advocacy. The Arjun Malhotra Foundation for Fraud Victims has become an internationally recognized institution that has directly assisted over 3,000 individuals, while also funding research and policy initiatives that have contributed to systematic improvements in fraud detection, victim support, and law enforcement cooperation across multiple countries and jurisdictions. The legislative changes that his advocacy helped achieve have been adopted across numerous jurisdictions and have contributed to more effective prosecution of complex fraud schemes, while also providing enhanced resources for victims and their families who need support navigating complicated legal systems and recovery processes that often extend for years. The international law enforcement cooperation that was essential for investigating Priya and Ravi's crimes has evolved into permanent frameworks for combating elaborate fraud and deception schemes, with specialized units sharing intelligence and coordinating operations that have disrupted hundreds of criminal networks while establishing protocols for protecting vulnerable individuals. The victim support services that were enhanced in response to his case continue to provide specialized assistance for individuals who have been betrayed by trusted family members or friends, while also contributing to enhanced understanding of effective therapeutic interventions that help survivors rebuild their capacity for trust and authentic relationships. The technological innovations that have resulted from foundation-funded research continue to provide enhanced fraud detection and prevention capabilities, while also supporting legitimate verification systems that help individuals and organizations confirm identities and detect potential deception without violating privacy rights or creating unnecessary barriers to legitimate activities. The educational initiatives that have grown out of Arjun's case continue to reach thousands of potential victims through programs that provide practical information about fraud prevention, while also raising awareness about the warning signs that might indicate manipulation or deception by trusted individuals who exploit personal relationships for criminal purposes. The relationship that Arjun eventually built with victim advocate Dr. Sarah Mitchell, whom he married 8 years after discovering the conspiracy, demonstrated that authentic love and trust were possible even after experiencing devastating betrayal though their relationship required careful development and ongoing commitment to transparency and mutual respect. The ongoing impact of his advocacy work extends beyond individual protection to include systematic improvements in fraud prevention, victim support, and law enforcement cooperation that continue to evolve in response to new criminal techniques while maintaining focus on the human cost of crimes that exploit, trust, and destroy lives. The story of Arjun Malhotra serves as a permanent reminder that while trust and friendship represent some of humanity's most valuable relationships, these bonds must be balanced with appropriate awareness of the sophisticated criminals who exploit love and loyalty to facilitate devastating crimes that can destroy lives and communities. His legacy lives on through the thousands of potential victims who have been protected by the awareness programs his advocacy made possible, the hundreds of families who have received support through his foundation's services, and the systematic improvements in fraud detection and victim protection that emerged from his comprehensive response to personal tragedy, ensuring that his suffering was ultimately transformed into lasting positive change that continues to benefit vulnerable individuals and families worldwide.